I am Frank Schumpert, your host, and you are listening to the Empires of History podcast, the Ottoman series, episode 13, the Ottoman Interregnum. Please stay tuned to the end of the show for news and other podcast recommendations. We left the Ottoman Empire in somewhat of a very serious predicament. Historians have alternatively called the period between 1403 to 1411 as the Ottoman Civil Wars, or more recently the Ottoman Interregnum. And perhaps my favorite and proof positive that Marxist political correction has penetrated even Ottoman studies, quote, the Ottoman conflict for religious inclusiveness. And for the record, from what I was able to research, it wasn't about inclusiveness, nor was it religious. It was a good old fight for the throne between princes of the realm. Plain and simple. Sultan Bayezid died in captivity back in episode 12. Whether by his own hand, going insane, or at Timur's orders, we're not entirely sure. What we can be certain of is the empire wouldn't face such a crisis to its very existence till the Russian and Ottoman wars centuries later, when Orthodox Christian armies parked outside Constantinople, threatening to take the city, then moving on out to gut the Ottoman Empire in its very heart, western Anatolia. Bayezid left behind 4 Ottoman princes who would vie for the power of the Sultanate. Anatolia, already devastated by Bayezid's campaigns in the 1390s, then later by Timur's invasions, would bear the brunt of it. For the Muslims born in Asia Minor during the reign of Murad I and brought up during Bayezid's, quote, lightning wars, their generation would drink bitterly from the cup of hardship, strife, death, starvation, and the ever-present fear of enemy raids, and all this before the Ottoman Interregnum. The problem arose because the system of succession was decided entirely by the sitting sultan, and Bayezid died before an heir could be officially named. A sultan could choose whomever he wished. Youngest or oldest, it simply didn't matter. The army could support their candidate, the religious establishment theirs, and the powerful Turkish beys could show their favorite by giving them gifts and marriages. But at the end of the day, it was up to the sultan to decide who was going to rule the empire after he was gone. Bayezid, before the Battle of Ankara, had no clear favorite. His eldest son, Ertugrul, born in 1378, died of natural causes sometime in 1400, leaving behind 7 sons. The 4 prominent princes who will serve as the major players during the Interregnum were Sulyeman, born in 1377, Isa, born in 1380, Mehmed, born in 1382, and Musa, born in 1388. There were 3 other sons of Bayezid who played no role in the coming wars for one reason or another. They were Musa, who had been captured during the Battle of Ankara along with the Sultan, a young prince by the name of Yusuf, whom Byzantine sources record as having actually converted to Christianity and lived out his life quietly in a monastery somewhere in Serbia, and his case wasn't out of the ordinary in coming years. Later Ottoman princes, finding themselves not having been chosen as successor, would often convert to Christianity and enter the monasteries, their conversion permanently disqualifying them from ever being able to ascend the Sultanate. The Quranic injunction to execute apostate Muslims notwithstanding, it was often a prudent move on the part of the princes on the losing side. Another son by the name of Qasim is recorded to have been handed off to the Byzantine emperor as a hostage. However, Qasim completely drops off the historical record and is never heard from again after 1402. Bayezid died in Timur's captivity in 1403. When news reached the Ottomans, Prince Sulyeman was in Edirne and commanded the European portion of the empire. The second son, Isa, was in the area of western Anatolia, and he enjoyed the support of the more traditional Turkish families in Bursa. Also present at Timur's court was Musa, and he was subsequently released, the intention on Tamir's part probably to stir up trouble in the fragmenting Ottoman Empire. In and around the city of Amasya in eastern Turkey was Mehmed. Looking at the situation in 1403, a betting man could feel safe in putting his money on Sulyeman. The European half of the empire was the most populous and richest, and even more importantly, Sulyeman enjoyed the core of the Janissaries and logistical systems behind them. Coming in close second was Isa. The religious and political importance of Bursa could not be understated, and the city was firmly in the prince's hands. Sultans counted their tombs in the ancient city, and it was the epicenter of the vast and complex Islamic charity system, as well as the seat of the vitally important ulama, who has the power to confer legitimacy upon any new sultan. Every janissary in the empire at this point also looked to Bursa for their spiritual roots, but also for the regular shipments of food, military clothing, and money from charity to supplement their lives in the barracks. Plus, strategically located, control of Bursa was vital to any military commander wishing to advance into Anatolia, and an important stop-off point to a European invasion. At this point, you might get curious and wonder, when and would Christian Europe take advantage of the Ottoman weakness and launch another crusade like Nicopolis? Divided 4 ways, the empire would be unable to muster its combined military and vast resources to combat a concerted attack. Simply put, Europe lacked the unity and will, a common theme in the next century and a half going forward. Hungary was still fighting the repercussions from its defeat at Nicopolis. The Venetians and the Pope all failed in their diplomatic offensives to convince Tamir to invade Europe and destroy the Ottomans. The only entity in a position to benefit from the Ottoman fragmentation was Constantinople, whose emperors watched the blockade fall apart and the Ottoman princes each beseeching the emperor for recognition as the rightful sultan. One important element in winning any medieval war is often who strikes first. Mehmed, based around Amasya, learned from his spies that Tamir had released the prince Musa, as previously mentioned. The city of Amasya was in the far eastern portion of Anatolia, and Mehmed realized he could be facing a situation of encirclement from Musa and Isa. Deciding not to count the prominent families, nor offer bribes to the janissaries, like his older brother Sulyeman had just done, he decided to act with what force he had on hand. The Interregnum was thus kicked off in late 1403, during 2 crucial battles of Ermeni and Ulabad between Mehmed and Isa. Mehmed took his army, a couple thousand of Anatolian horsemen, and immediately marched, much in the spirit of his father, north toward Bursa. We don't have much in the way of information or descriptions of these battles, but most historians agree it wasn't a massive Lord of the Rings affair, but rather small skirmishes here and there. Neither son having a truly large Ottoman army, it is highly probable that the so-called battles were merely mass defections from Isa's armies to Mehmed's. At any rate, what is recorded as a final battle of Karasai between the 2 groups resulted in Mehmed's victory. Isa fled the field with a small group of followers, where he hoped to seek refuge in the Bay of Karaman. After a sizable portion of gold and gifts exchanged hands, Isa was murdered while taking a bath by agents of his brother. Mehmed, in a matter of a few months, had completely upset the political calculations of Sulyeman, after the defeat and death of Isa. Now controlling the entire Eastern Empire, as well as Bursa, Mehmed would soon be strong enough to invade the European side of the Bosporus. Sulyeman's initial strategy seemed to be to enter into talks with Isa about a possible partitioning of the empire, with the Byzantine emperor conferring recognition on Sulyeman as sultan and Isa as bey of the new and greater Anatolia. However, watching as Mehmed amassed warriors and wealth, the eldest brother knew he must act. In May of 1404, Sulyeman mustered an army composed of a contingent of Janissaries and Turkish horsemen. No credible sources recorded the actual number of this force, nor can we break down Sulyeman's order of battle with any great degree of confidence. However, by the end of May, it seemed as though Mehmed's rapidly assembled army either defected or melted away while marching out from Bursa. By early June, Bursa had fallen to Sulyeman, and Mehmed was forced to retreat to Ankara and muster what he could of his army. However, by mid-July, Sulyeman's army arrived here too and inflicted a defeat on Mehmed. In any other story, surely this would have counted as the final defeat of Mehmed. I'm not too strong a fan of the idea of anything like historical destiny, but I do think we should sit up and take note when people in history act in ways the society, culture, and even us don't think they will. At this point, Mehmed still had safe options. He could flee to Timir's court, beg for asylum from the innumerable beys, or head deeper east even. However, Mehmed didn't give up. After his defeat at Ankara, Mehmed fled into the countryside, and in the process discharged from his service the fickle warriors who were in it for gold and glory and promises of promotion. Around him, Mehmed formed a corps of loyal veterans of his father's campaigns, foot soldiers and horsemen with an axe to grind against both Isa and Sulyeman, and whose loyalty was to their own revenge and couldn't be readily bought. Moreover, most of his men were now locals and knew the countryside well, a fact Mehmed soon turned to his advantage. After the Battle of Ankara, Sulyeman was secure, at least on paper. Sulyeman controlled at this point the bulk of the empire's population, income, and resources. However, where Sulyeman marched, his army left smoldering embers in its wake. Much like his fast-tempered father Bayezid, Sulyeman possessed a hot temper and ran roughshod over the local customs, marriage alliances, and overall sensibilities of the region. To make matters worse, the eldest brother jacked up the tax rate over the lands he had just conquered from Mehmed, not only on the Christian subjects, but those of his Muslims as well. Pretty soon, the whispered talk in the alleyways, hookah bars, and taverns was how nice life had been under Mehmed's very brief rule, and how the younger brother seemed so much like his revered grandfather, the great Murad I. On the other hand, here was this upstart and arrogant Sulyeman, who came to Anatolia for what? To raise our rents and taxes? No, thank you. In August of 1404, Sulyeman returned to the European portion of the empire, and left Anatolia and the lands he had just won over to subordinate generals and pashas. As soon as the prince turned his back and headed west, infighting broke out almost immediately between generals and pashas. I won't get into many of the details here, but suffice it to say that HBO could produce an entire 10-season episodes on the infighting, backstabbing, cloak and dagger assassins dance that prevailed in the coming 2 years. Taking advantage of the unpopularity, unrest, and divided command structure left by Sulyeman, Mehmed initiated a series of military operations consisting of ambushes, raids, hostage-taking, and hit-and-run tactics. 6 months after Sulyeman's departure, his pashas and generals were facing down a full-blown insurrection, spearheaded by the hardcore members of Mehmed's followers. Pretty soon, a strategic stalemate ensued. At this critical point, Timur released another Ottoman prince from his custody, Musa. The prince had been captured too at the Battle of Ankara, along with his father. Timur never gave Musa the recognition as sultan he so desperately craved, but seemed to have released him solely to prolong the Ottoman civil wars, and perhaps when he finished with China, he might turn back west and deal the Ottomans a final crushing blow. Musa arrived in Mehmed's hidden camp in the Anatolian forest in 1405, and arrived begging for shelter and publicly renounced any claim to the throne. Mehmed soon grew to trust his brother and awarded Musa command of a small group of warriors, numbering some 2,000. Mehmed primarily decided on sending his brother on diplomatic missions deep into western Anatolia, territory that was on paper firmly in his rival brother's control. For this purpose, he wanted to issue gifts of gold and promises of office to the major families should they turn their support to Mehmed. Thus, over the next 6 years, Mehmed managed to wrest control over eastern, then later west on up to Bursa, the entire Anatolian lands, not by military force, but via diplomatic victories, coupled with time-tested cloak-and-dagger operations. Sulyeman, who had retired to Edirne in 1407, soon read report after report as slowly one town after another switched alliances to Mehmed. At this point, a fast and decisive march to the east would have been prudent, but Sulyeman, long since grown accustomed to the soft living of the harem in Edirne, preferred to leave the execution of the war against his brother to subordinates. These commanders would arrive in Anatolia, only to be assassinated or bribed into switching sides. When Bursa too opened its gates to Mehmed in 1410, Sulyeman made ready to once again muster his army for an invasion of Anatolia. Mehmed, now based in Persia, received news from Sulyeman's turncoat commanders that his eldest brother was planning another expedition, and this time would have the Serbian knights under Lazarevic at his command. In order to counter this move before Sulyeman picked up steam, Mehmed sent Musa into Thrace on a twofold mission. First, with his loyal and now highly experienced 2,000 horsemen plus auxiliaries, to cause as much havoc as they could and delay Sulyeman. Second, to send money, gold, and offer any concessions to Prince Lazarevic, anything to keep the Serbians out of the war as long as possible. In August of 1410, Musa crossed into Europe over the Dardanelles. From his position in southeastern Europe, he sent envoys to Prince Lazarevic and proceeded to raid the supply routes and bribe the assembling army that was headed over to Edirne to muster under Sulyeman. Alternating between small-scale skirmishes and the occasional defection from Sulyeman's army, Musa proved so great a nuisance that the elder brother decided he needed to deal with him first before setting out for Bursa. Musa and Sulyeman met at Cosmidian in September. During the night before, both sides had been camped close, and Musa's men had infiltrated the enemy camp. Many, having only recently come over to Musa's side, still had their friends and buddies aplenty on the opposing side. And by the next day, Sulyeman had lost almost 20% of his army defected to Musa. As with most battles during the Interregnum period, we don't have a whole lot of concrete evidence or facts on what exactly happened, but it appears as though Sulyeman commanded some 3,000 janissaries and 4,000 irregular horsemen and footmen. Musa, whose 2,000 Anatolian horsemen had grown, thanks to defections to some 5,000 infantry, horsemen, and archers, faced off against him. When the two sides met for battle, Sulyeman still felt he had more than a fighting chance. Despite the defections, his army still outnumbered Musa's by a sizable number. Once he removed Musa from the battlefield, he could make an example of the traitors and help prevent further defections when he was ready to march against Mehmed. However, something strange happened the morning of the battle. As the mist lifted in the morning and the two sides were drawing up, the janissaries, it was noticed, were not marching in battle ready for fighting formation. Angrily approaching the Aga of the janissaries, their commanding officer, Sulyeman demanded they march, to which the esteemed veteran of Bayezid's campaigns replied, quote, "It is not to mere soldiers who should decide the next sultan, but the will of Allah alone. Whomever Allah chooses is the one we shall follow." End quote. In other words, in case I failed to make it clear, the main body of janissaries on Sulyeman's side decided to sit this one out. Seeing the janissaries march off the field in good order, Sulyeman's remaining 4,000 soldiers threw down their weapons as Musa's force advanced. Captured alive after having attempted to escape the field by his erstwhile former troops, Sulyeman was executed by strangulation via bowstring, the first such recorded instance of an Ottoman prince being dispatched in such a manner. But I promise, dear listeners, if you hang on with me and listen to the podcast, he won't be the last. Back in Bursa, Mehmed as yet hadn't learned of Musa's victory at Kosmedian, but he had reason to wonder just what was going on across the Bosporus. Musa had stopped all communication by middle September. By October, the Byzantine Emperor Manuel II, once a staunch ally of Sulyeman, an infinite enemy of Mehmed, was now sending desperate messages to Mehmed begging for aid. I imagine Mehmed's head must have been spinning a little when the facts suddenly became clear. Why would an ally of Sulyeman, the Byzantine emperor no less, be asking for help from him? And of all the people who was besieging Constantinople, it had to be Musa? Wasn't he supposed to be harassing Sulyeman's army or something? Soon the pieces all fell together in Mehmed's broken records and dispatches. The Battle of Kosmedian and death of Sulyeman and triumph of Musa. Musa had actually himself proclaimed Sultan. The situation grew tense between the brothers, as you can imagine, with letters and dispatches from Mehmed's camp demanding the immediate lifting of the siege of Constantinople, and Musa demanding that the Ottoman Empire be divided into two halves, quote, each to pursue his own destiny according to his own will, end quote. This went on for the better part of a year and a half as each side maneuvered for better strategic positioning against the other. In 1413, deciding not to waste any more precious time, and with promise of aid from the Byzantine emperor, Mehmed mustered what forces he could and crossed the Bosporus with ships loaned out from Constantinople. At the approach of Mehmed, we are told, although exact numbers aren't known, much larger army, Musa retreated north. Relieving the siege of Constantinople, Mehmed met up with Stefan Lazarevich and signed a peace treaty with the Serbs, with the latter promising Christian knights in the fight against Musa. Mehmed tracked Musa north, just south of modern-day Sofia in Bulgaria. From there, the historical records are very hazy to say the least, but from various sources, here's what I was able to piece together. Some Byzantine and Serbian forces say that both sides assembled and a surprise cavalry charge took Musa's forces by surprise. Others have said that a solid advance by Anatolian infantry broke Mehmed's lines. Whatever seemed to have happened, what we know for sure is that either side numbered no more than 5,000, and that the Serbian knights did launch a devastating charge that broke the left flank of Musa's army. At any rate, Musa was captured during the battle and his men surrendered. Ottoman sources coming down to us from the reign of Sultan Sulyeman the Magnificent illustrate a very distraught and torn Mehmed by the battle's end. It seemed that in the struggling years between 1406 to 1410, he had grown to truly care for and love his brother Musa, and at first let his wishes be known that Musa should be exiled. However, the Aga of the Janissaries is said to have come before the Sultan and pointed to a high pall of white and bloodied mitres, the head caps worn by Janissaries, indicating the soldiers fallen in battle to put him on the throne, and grimly handed Mehmed a bowstring. So it was by the year 1413, the Ottoman civil wars were concluded with Mehmed I proclaimed Sultan in Bursa later that summer. As the year closed, an uneasy Byzantine Empire looked at the Ottomans, now reunited, and it is said the Greeks closed their shop doors and prayers could be heard in all Orthodox churches for God's mercy and deliverance for the times ahead. That concludes episode 13 for now. I hope you enjoyed the show. For those of you who are regular listeners, I would like to apologize for the nearly 3-month delay in episode production. Between some very important life changes and falling ill, it's been a bust on my end for quite some time. However, everything seems to be settled, and I feel like I can get back to our regular scheduled shows and hopefully do some more author interviews. Now, if you're like me and tend to get impatient waiting for your next favorite podcast to release, sometimes it always pays to have others waiting in the catch. With that said, might I suggest you give True Crime Recaps a try? I'm currently on episode 5, Where is Susan Cox Powell? And I have to admit, I didn't think anything this crazy happens in real life. Note to self when my daughter starts dating, be sure her boyfriend's father isn't crazy. You can find True Crime Recap narrated by Amy on Twitter at True Crimes Recaps, and where I listen to it also on Apple Podcast. If you enjoyed today's show, please consider supporting the show by going to Apple Podcast, Stitcher, and Spotify, and by visiting the show's website at all one word, Empiresofhistorypodcast.blueberry.net, where you can comment and subscribe. As usual, if you feel I can improve the show, please drop me a line at empiresofhistorypodcast@gmail.com. Many thanks.